It's the Real News Network. I'm Sharmini Pires coming to you from Baltimore. Financial giant Deutsche Bank says it has found no connection between President Donald Trump's personal assets and the Russian state. The Frankfurt-based company was pressured in January to review Trump's finances in the weeks after it paid $630 million to settle charges of laundering $10 billion for Russian investors. Deutsche Bank is no stranger to financial fraud and illegal transactions. It has paid out billions to settle charges, including the LIBOR rate manipulation scandal, mortgage-backed securities fraud in the United States, and violations of sanctions with Iran and Syria. Joining us to discuss this latest bank controversy involving Trump and his empire is James Henry. James is a leading economist, attorney, and investigative journalist who has written extensively about global issues. Thanks so much for joining us again, James.
You're quite welcome. Good to be with you.
So, James, your reaction to the Deutsche Bank's claim that Trump's accounts have no connection with the Russian state?
Well, I didn't read the story that way. I think they were a little bit reluctant to talk about what they'd done, and it's not clear how extensive the reviews have been. I mean, the odd thing is that Deutsche Bank has basically, for a very long time, been the only, sort of first world bank that has loaned Donald Trump any money ever since the 90s, when he had 6 bankruptcies. And he basically upset all of the major Wall Street banks. So it was only really Deutsche Bank that would loan to him. And it's always been kind of a puzzle because, he's treated them very badly. In 2010, he sued them for $3 billion over claiming that they were responsible for the financial crisis. It's been a rocky road. But So people have always wondered. I mean, Deutsche Bank today has about $300 million out of the total $650 million that the Trump organization has in debt. And they also have quite a few loans out to his family members like Jared Kushner. It's a puzzle. They have a long-standing relationship. I think it's partly on the private banking side. We don't know much about that. Anyway, I would take this finding with a grain of salt because we're not allowed to look at the documents. What I can tell you is that in other domains, Deutsche Bank has a long history of laundering Russian money. They've just been tagged with this $630 million fine for laundering $10 billion of Russian money, dirty money, and using Moscow office and the New York office to do that. The current Secretary of Commerce nominee, Wilbur Ross, turns out was vice chairman of a little bank in Cyprus that has a lot of Russian money in it. And, he's a vice chairman of that bank. He invested $1 billion in the bank. And who did he make the new chairman of the Bank of Cyprus, which is one of the biggest Russian laundromats in the world? Joseph Ackerman, who ran Deutsche Bank during this whole period of incredible criminality, during which they had, everything from facilitating tax dodging and sanctions busting to mortgage fraud, the money laundering stuff, sanctions busting, the just endless number of criminal offenses. I think they've paid now nearly $20 billion in fines, and the bank has really been hurting as a result of this. And yet Ackerman now has been recruited by this guy Wilbur Ross, who's very close to Trump. So we're trying to sort all this out. I think it's not some grand conspiracy, but it is unusual for a big bank like Deutsche Bank to be so heavily geared to a real estate developer who's never really been that successful.
I must say, James, you wrote a very interesting investigative article at the end of 2016 detailing Trump's connection with the Russian oligarchs. You included a 2008 quotation from Trump's son in which he told Manhattan Conference that former Soviet Union investors backed a lot of real estate projects for the Trump organization. Lay out for us what they were and how did they connect all of this investments.
The interesting story I was telling was that, how do we get Trump and Putin at the same time? to come out of the woods here. And I traced it back to this period of real economic decline in the 1990s when all kinds of capital flights started pouring out of Russia. And that proceeded to continue as Russia became more and more of a autocratic country under Putin. So, that helped to finance people like Donald Trump, who were, able to provide an outlet for money laundering, basically. A lot of Russian capital flowed into lousy projects here. And we suspect that, the investors really weren't looking that carefully. My article in the American Interest, is a little bit hard to summarize, but I go through 5 or 6 different cases where there are just all these very strange connections between the Trump crowd and all of these, basically a lot of Russian oligarchs, mobsters, and outright crooks. So, I think the more we know about this situation, the more we say, at the very least, the president has not been very discriminating the people he does business with, with respect to the people that he does business with.
Right, and James, you're a part of the tax justice movement. Do you think there is something in Donald Trump's tax records that would tie him to some of this activity, and that's why he's avoiding releasing them?
One of the things that tax returns show you is loans, because you have to have interest deductions. So if he has offshore companies that are not traded, they're not publicly visible, and yet he's taking a lot of deductions for some of the money that's being channeled to them or through them, that would show up in the tax returns. And so you get a lot more resolution in terms of figuring out what the whole network of the guy's business relationships are internationally. And he has an extraordinary number of companies offshore. I think he has 126 LLCs in Russia alone. Now, many of those are just, for protecting his brand. But we don't know until we look at the tax returns. He has basically not been straight with the public. He says he can't release returns that are under audit. That's just not true. But secondarily, all of his returns from 2008 back have already been audited. And it would be valuable even if we just had one single 2008 return to look at to expose some of these things. So, it's something disingenuous about the president's position on this issue. I wish he'd just get beyond it, because ordinary Americans just don't understand how there can be this lack of transparency.
Right. And the Bank Trade Association, James, called the Clearinghouse, just released a new report that calls for the easing of anti-money laundering regulations. They claim that the reports that they are legally obliged to file regarding criminal transactions are too much of a burden for them. What do you make of that?
I think that's just apologetics. I mean, they are, I'm waiting for the day when financial services industry actually steps forward and says, we'd like to do something to curb money laundering. That day hasn't come. I mean, I'm fairly knowledgeable about this whole area. And basically, we've made some progress in the last decade. Trump administration is on the verge of just rolling these things back. They have a project in place that Obama put in place to try to learn who the beneficial owners of real estate in major cities like New York and Miami are. And reportedly, Trump is going to repeal that. They just eliminated the requirement that was established in 2009 to have big oil companies publish what they pay to developing countries. They've made no progress at all toward the whole movement to get more transparency with respect to automatic information exchange and beneficial ownership, things that are, sound technical, but they're relatively simple to do, and a lot of really poor countries would benefit from such reforms. But I don't see this administration taking any steps or prioritizing those kinds of policies.
Right. And then just to clarify, what is this clearinghouse? It's an association of bankers, and who's in it?
Well, I think the clearinghouse has traditionally been places where the banks kind of on a wholesale basis settle their daily transactions with each other, and they do that, through a central meeting point rather than going individually to every other bank in the world. And there's a number of famous clearinghouses. There's the case of Clearstream in Luxembourg, where there was, they actually had a double set of books, and some people were having secret accounts. So it's important for us to understand clearinghouses. It sounds like a fairly technical area that's known only to banks, but the public at large has a stake in making sure there's a lot of transparency there too.
And then members of this association, clearinghouse, includes apparently Bank of America, Citigroup, Deutsche Bank, and HSBC, all those who are tied up in this scandal. So any policy advice from them should be of suspect.
I added up the top 22 banks in the world between 2000 and 2015. They committed something like 650 financial crimes of all kinds, sanctions busting and facilitating tax dodging and mortgage fraud, and so on and so forth. They paid for that a total of nearly $300 billion in fines as of the end of 2016. But it's had very little effect on their behavior. I think until we go back to actually sending individual bankers to jail, we're not going to have much progress on this transparency. And the industry just relentlessly makes this argument about trying to reduce cost, and these regulations do have some costs associated, but the greater benefit to the public, I think, is pretty well established. Just ask any law enforcement official.
All right, James, I thank you for now, and looking forward to unraveling that extensive investigative piece you did about the Trump and Russian connection. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Great. Thanks very much.
And thank you for joining us on the Real News Network.